The first-person shooter genre of games is one that is flooded with the likes of Call of Duty, Battlefield, Call of Duty, numerous battle royales and other online multiplayer games, and a little bit more Call of Duty. Oh yeah, throw Doom in there too, forgot about that one. Forgive me, there's so many Call of Duty games you could fill a swimming pool with them. Maybe a kiddie swimming pool, but that's still a swimming pool full of COD. Over the years, I've evolved from loving FPS games to hating them to just being indifferent about them. The genre is filled to the brim with mediocre at best releases and then countless titles in Hallmark game series, and quite frankly, I'm mostly over it. Shooter games are all very samey for the most part, especially when taking the whole combat war FPS formula into account, although there are some that stand out, which I obviously can't deny. I don't mind shooter games, but it takes something really special to fully grab my attention at this point, and Bioshock did exactly that. A couple months ago, I played Uncharted for the first time. That in and of itself was the first shooter game in general that I had played in a long time, but then more recently, about a month ago, I finally experienced Bioshock and its phenomenally unique take on the FPS genre. I've been missing out. Bioshock is such a beautiful game. I mean, it's gorgeous. If you're looking for an incredibly realistic look, Bioshock may not fit that bill, but for the look it tried to achieve, I can't imagine a better execution, especially in the remastered version, which runs at a silky smooth 60 frames per second with little to no frame drops, even on a 6.5-year-old jet engine, standard PS4. The world of Rapture looks incredible in its dilapidation, and although the map can be mind-bending sometimes, the world design itself is genius. The convolution strangely makes sense in the way that an unknown office building makes sense. It's not exactly fully sensical because you're lost, but it doesn't not make sense, you know? Like once you figure out the layout, it's easy to make your way around. You know what I'm trying to say. Similar to how the world design makes sense after discovering the layout and going through it for a few hours, you also come to discover that no areas of Rapture are without purpose. Everywhere you go has items that can be useful or are important, and basically every area that you see that cannot yet be accessed will be accessible later down the line after certain story events. This exceptional design and visual appearance of the underwater world of Rapture is also punctuated by a great sound design. The natural sonic elements of the areas feel so genuinely well put together that you basically don't even notice them during gameplay, because they fit so well, and this also helps enemies and their positions stand out. I can't really speak much for the music though. I legitimately can't think of more than like 2 or 3 times off the top of my head when I heard music or a score in this game. That's not to say it was bad, there just wasn't much at all, and what played was decent I'm sure, but not necessarily jaw-dropping enough for me to make major comment. Aside from these random tracks, all I really remember are the short little jingle type things tied directly to specific in-game affairs, and random 20th century songs that played at times throughout the city and gave some of my Let's Play videos copyright claims. Ugh, regardless. The sounds of weapons firing is punchy and satisfying, and the groans of bouncers and rosies alongside spider splicers crawling on the ceiling and the incoherent rambling of all the other enemies all lend to a creepy ambiance that feels borderline horror and unsettling, reminding you of a brief history that proves of the inevitable dystopia that all utopias are destined to become. And the man behind this once utopia is Andrew Ryan. With the desire to live free of the rules of the surface, Ryan originally wanted Rapture to be a truly independent establishment, free of religious, economic, and governmental restrictions and oppression, intending it to run under a laissez-faire system. This system is essentially the equivalent of a completely free market, like capitalism, except it's even more deep into the concept of free enterprise. During the early stages of the city's existence, a special sea slug was discovered that secreted a substance called Adam, which the people of Rapture used to construct plasmids, or unique creations that could be injected into somebody's body to grant them powers and abilities beyond their wildest dreams. Along the way, a doctor named Tenenbaum infused the little girls with the slugs that secreted Adam to create the Little Sisters, who seem to be practically invincible to everything except for some illnesses. The job of the Little Sisters was to gather more Adam from the corpses of people around the city. Obviously, Adam was an important thing in Rapture, Rapture, so important that Ryan forbade travel to the surface in fear that the world would come to invade them in search of the substance. So much for being free of oppression. At the time, Rapture was a great place to live in, until revolutions started taking center stage. In comes Frank Fontaine, a gangster and smuggler, who wanted to overthrow Rapture and take it away from its creator. In the process, Fontaine created a black market for atom and plasmids and also rallied the poorer people of the city to rise up alongside him against the upper class. In one attack, however, Fontaine died, and Ryan responded with extreme paranoia and locked the city down even further, seizing more control over things as time went on, all in the effort of keeping his city and thus his dreams safe, but sacrificing along the way the very things that Rapture was meant to stand for in the first place. Following the death of Fontaine, a liberator called Atlas rose among the ranks to continue the fight that Fontaine was battling. Ryan attempted to keep the little sisters safe by creating Big Daddies to protect them at all costs. Atlas then created splicers, people infused with plasmids who fell under his control. With tensions rising, a historic 1958 to 1959 New Year's Eve party was attacked by Atlas and his splicers, which was the start of the end for the city, causing it to shortly become the mess that we see in the game less than 2 years later. Upon the start of the game, you play as Jack, a man on an airplane. The plane crashes into the ocean, and whether by miracle or curse, he ends up right on Rapture's front door. Upon entering a bathysphere, he is taken to the city to witness the disrepair. This is where Atlas quickly befriends Jack, telling him that he's just trying to escape the city and reunite with his wife and son in the smuggler's hideout. But the way there happens to be blocked off though, and Jack has to go through the medical pavilion instead, encountering the man known as Dr. Steinman. A renowned plastic surgeon turned crazy lunatic, Steinman holds the key to the bathysphere that Jack needs to leave the pavilion, and when entering his workplace we understand that he has a strange obsession with asymmetry and art when relating to his surgical practices, going so far as to want to be the Picasso of surgery. After defeating the man and taking the key, it's off to Neptune's bounty, where Jack has to go through Fontaine fisheries to reach the hideout. However, despite Atlas telling the gatekeeper, Peach Wilkins, that Jack is good, Wilkins still has a massive paranoia that his previous smuggling buddy, Frank Fontaine, is out to get him despite being dead, and requires Jack to prove he's not actually working for Fontaine somehow. Jack does this and is granted access to the fisheries, but forced to relinquish his weapons. While defenseless, Wilkins snaps and attacks Jack, believing an assassination attempt is nigh. Jack defeats the man and then makes his way to where Atlas's family is located, but Andrew Ryan has other plans. Ryan launches an attack using splicers that he turned against Atlas to force Atlas to flee and proceeds to destroy the bathysphere, killing Atlas's family. After this, Atlas basically commands Jack to find and kill Ryan, which takes him through Arcadia, the place that provides Rapture with most of its oxygen. But before reaching the bathysphere and rolling hills, Ryan releases a toxic gas that kills all the flora in Arcadia. To stop and reverse this, Jack goes on a hunt as a favor to botanist Julie Langford so that she can create the Lazarus Vector, a treatment to not only stop the effects of Ryan's gas, but revive the trees entirely. Ryan kills Langford for betraying him, but Jack is able to find the necessary materials to create the substance and fix the problem himself. He then moves on to Fort Frolic so that he can go to Hephaestus where Atlas waits. But Jack is interrupted again, this time by Sander Cohen, an artistic creator who stops him from going further until he kills and pictures some people for him, because he's kind of a weird dude. Here, it is possible to find the corpse of Jasmine Jolene, an exotic dancer and lover of Andrew Ryan. Random inclusion? Sure, maybe. We'll get there in a bit though, I promise. Following leaving Fort Frolic, Jack reaches Hephaestus and has to construct a bomb to allow himself entry into Ryan's office to kill him, as per Atlas's command. Upon reaching the office, some pretty serious discoveries are made. This entire time, Jack has been a puppet to Atlas, following any order with the phrase, "would you kindly" in it. When confronted by Ryan, Jack is practically forced to kill him by the man himself using the phrase. Ryan knew at this point that he could not stop Jack, and decided if he was going to die, he was going to do so by his own means, and by proving a point while at it. Jack was the reason the plane came crashing down early in the game. The box in the opener held a weapon to be used to shoot the pilot and bring the aircraft down. Jack was just a child when he was taken by Atlas, and bred to the man's bidding from the very start. Atlas is actually Frank Fontaine undercover for several years after faking his own death. And perhaps even more mind-blowing than any of these revelations is the implication that Ryan is actually Jack's father. Remember the body of Jasmine found in Fort Frolic? She was Jack's mother, who made a deal with Fontaine to sell the unborn fetus of Jack so that she may be able to live independently from Ryan. Following this arrangement, Ryan found out and murdered Jasmine, but Fontaine was still able to find a way to use Jack for himself. Back in present time, after a failed attempt to get rid of him, Jack wakes up in Dr. Tenenbaum's hideout with a bunch of little sisters, having been helped by the doctor to reverse some of the major effects of Fontaine's conditioning, but some remains. Jack is tasked with finding the cure to remove Fontaine's control entirely, and then makes his way to Atlas, who slips out just before Jack can do anything. Tenenbaum guides Jack through turning himself into a Big Daddy by finding pheromone scents that attract the little sisters, locating diving suit pieces, and using something to edit his voice box to help the little sisters want to help him reach Fontaine. At the very top of Rapture, Jack fights Fontaine, who is all sorts of jacked on loads of Adam, and the little sisters in the end aid him to finish off the man completely, presumably freeing Rapture of the battles that has destroyed it the past few years, although there's not really anybody left to enjoy it. But with two endings, Jack's character can either make the choice to return to the surface to start a nuclear war, or become an amazing father figure for the little sisters. All depends on the way you played the game. Being dropped into the game with no clue what the world is about is normally something I'm hit or miss on, but I think it was executed well in Bioshock. The in-game story can be a little hard to follow at first, yet the intrigue gained through spoken dialogue, audio diaries, and the atmosphere of the city itself make it impossible to put down. The voice acting in Bioshock is exceptional in all regards. The little sisters are creepy, the splicers scattered around are unsettling, the audio diaries are incredibly well crafted, and the explicit in-game events build genuine interest and grab your attention. And speaking of explicit in-game events, I cannot commend Bioshock enough for how well the dialogue is built, especially from Atlas's character. When you first start the game and experience the story, you legitimately trust Atlas and want to do what he wants, until you realize the whole "would you kindly" reveal from Ryan, and then you just sit in shock. And upon replaying the game, you can actually determine early on how nonsensical half of what Atlas says really is. When you arrive, you can tell that he was expecting you. When he tells you you're his only hope of seeing his family again, he sounds genuine. But then when he's there at the smuggler's hideout, it becomes obvious he was lying from the start. When you continue to go through Rapture by Atlas's command, you really start to discern just how unreasonable some of the requests are, especially going and killing Ryan himself, or at least under the guise of Atlas. None of it makes sense. As Fontaine creating a story to ice the cake that is his control over Jack, it does. But regardless of how the explicit story is presented to the player, you can tell just how much care was put into letting the world itself tell the story of Rapture. And watching the hour and a half of the director's cut commentary reveals just how important to the essence of Bioshock the actual construction and appearance of Rapture was. And this leads us to the audio diaries, which give some context of the backstory of Rapture and some of the characters with big roles behind it. Some of the diaries are even random at first, about random characters and things that initially mean nothing, but when piecing together the puzzle that turned Rapture into what we see in game, even the seemingly unconnected ones help to make major reveals, such as how we were able to determine that Jack is Ryan's son, turned into Fontaine's puppet after being stolen and essentially programmed into submission. The diaries are constructed in a manner that leaves you as a player fascinated about what kind of world you crash landed in, without them being so detailed that there's no wonder left in that world. This wonder makes the twists that it takes so meaningful and impactful. When I finally got to Ryan's office and was confronted by him, I knew right at that moment that I had been played by Atlas. That betrayal by itself isn't exactly mind-blowing, and I more or less expected something like it to happen from the beginning, but the fact that I was caught off guard until Ryan's spiel says all it needs to about the game's writing. In terms of 2020 especially, this may not seem super special to some, but in 2007, this might have seemed a fair bit more profound. Besides, it was the experience of being in the story itself that meant more to me as a player than what was actually said in the story. Although the contents of it, including the themes of puppetry, politics, and agency, are all masterful in their own way. Bioshock's gameplay mechanics are outstanding, remarkable, extraordinary, and any other variant of this compliment you can possibly imagine. Truly, it is astonishing. As has been made obvious already, Bioshock is a first-person shooter game, and it's the first of its genre that has really engrossed me in years. I genuinely have not felt like I loved an FPS game in so long, it's insane. It's probably been since junior high school, maybe early high school at the most recent, but this game shocked me, no pun intended, with how well it combined those shooter elements with others to create a unique experience very different from your copy and paste COD game. First of all, the game doesn't even start off with Jack empowered with a weapon of any sort, and when he finally obtains one, it's a wrench for crying out loud. Side note, using the right tonics, you can actually go through a majority of the game with only the wrench and be just fine. It's seriously OP with the right tonics, as I discovered in my second non-Let's Play playthrough. Bioshock's gameplay mechanics are also shockingly polished. Again, pun not intended. I really need to rethink my adjectives and adverbs. Anyway, Bioshock's gameplay mechanics are surprisingly polished. Both the plasmid and shooter systems incorporate similar button commands, which makes the memorization of how to work it pretty easy after an hour or so. For example, circle always heals, so that no matter what you're doing, you can always top off your health. Square always reloads, whether it be topping off your Eve bar or the ammo in your weapon. X always loots and grabs stuff, triangle always jumps. Move over to the D-pad. The left up and down buttons on the D-pad always change your ammo type. The right button on the D-pad gives you a hint if you're stuck. Now onto the joysticks. L3 moves, obviously, and pushing it in crouches. R3 adjusts your POV, obviously again, and pushing it in aims your weapon, which is ultimately the only really unconventional mechanic in the game that I'm unhappy with. More on that in a bit. Finally, we come to the triggers. R1 and L1 switch between your weapons and your plasmids respectively, and holding each one allows you to select from the larger total of them. R2 and L2 directly use those item types. Lastly, we also have the miscellaneous controls. The touchpad opens your map and options opens the pause menu. Both of these are pretty standardized. Now, I mentioned that the R3 press for aiming is one of the few things I'm not a fan of, and that's just because it doesn't work for my playstyle. Of course, the common L2 plus R2 aim and shoot system is popular and it works well, but obviously the plasmids make that not logical here. R3 makes sense for Bioshock, but due to a weirdly narrow field of vision as well as movement speed and accuracy ironically being throttled while aiming, I found myself hip shooting with the crosshairs most of the time because it just works better, or at least it did for me. Like I suggested earlier, the controls are really intuitive and honestly rather simple to learn, but there's a pretty high skill ceiling at the same time. There's got to be an insane amount of practice that goes into using the weapons and plasmids together in the best and most efficient manner. I admittedly never got to that point personally, but you bet your ass I still had fun with what I did get good at. I have no gripes with the gameplay loop. In fact, I have nothing but praise and compliments for it. But what about some of the other integrated gameplay systems? There are plenty of them after all. First up is the hacking system, which is completely unique to this game compared to most other games, and the hacking rewards are neat, being able to have the machines and items be directly beneficial to hack. However, it gets really old hacking everything after several hours. Of course, it's not at all necessary to do so, and that's completely my fault, but still. Wanting to hack everything to make my life easier just gets boring, unfortunately. Granted, I could have also made my life easier by doing more research with the camera early on, but I didn't realize how nice it would end up being for me until I started doing my research post-game for trophies. Second up is weapon upgrades, which is super simple. You arrive at an upgrade station capable of doing one total upgrade each, and you select out of a list which one you want, with each weapon having 2 upgrades. There are enough stations to be able to upgrade everything in one game if you explore well enough. This system is pretty unique and I do really like it. Next is the passive Vita chamber system, which is one of my favorite parts of this game. If you see a Vita chamber, it is automatically set so that when you die you immediately revive at the closest one with partial health and Eve, but all the progress you've made up to the point of death is saved. This sets it apart from other games where you die and restart from a previous save file, which is usually an absolute pain in the butt to deal with. This system allows for the game to be a lot more quick and fast paced in general, which is also nice because that's how the movement feels too. There is no sprint option, but the normal walking seems normal. It's also constructed in a way that you don't miss being able to slide or roll or dodge either. And lastly, the world building, despite the map's confusing appearance, is nice. Given that there's always an arrow pointing to where your objective is, you can choose to explore the unnecessary side areas at your own discretion and leisure, and if you choose to do so, you will never be at a loss for any materials, including and especially ammo. And since I'm always the type of person to do literally anything and everything that I possibly can before I do the main objective, this very much suited my playstyle. Overall, the gameplay systems are explained well and they are also introduced well. I mean, the tutorial of this game is more introducing you to the narrative than the gameplay for this very reason, because the gameplay tutorial happens as you need it to instead of it all being dumped on top of you at the start. All in all, the concise and organized nature of this never bogs down the gaming experience and learning how to play, even if it does take time to master it. And the best part is that getting the platinum trophy doesn't even require an insane mastery of it. I won't go super in depth about this here because I have a separate series planned at some point in the future for specific reviews that I obtain platinum trophies for. I mean, in less than 1 year of having my PS4, I've earned 7 platinum trophies despite doing school almost full time for that entire year. I don't always trophy hunt, but if I can reasonably get a platinum, I will. In fact, I started recording Bioshock on a Friday and finished recording it on a Sunday. So not only did it only take me 3 days to do the 16-hour let's play of the game, but then I proceeded to complete my entire second playthrough and get the rest of the trophies by the following Friday. 8 days. It took me 8 days to platinum this game, and it was glorious. The fact that I went so long without playing Bioshock is mind-blowing, and the fact that I went this long without getting spoiled for it is even more mind-blowing, but I am so happy it happened the way that it did. Playing Bioshock Remastered for the first time was one of the best times of 2020 for me, just because I got to no-life the hell out of it around the same time that some very stressful private life stuff was happening, and it helped to genuinely make me feel better. Whether it be beating the crap out of the brainwashed big daddies, rescuing the disturbingly creepy little sisters, or ridding the city of the villain for good, I cannot recommend this game enough to anybody else who, like me up to this point, has not played the game. And even if you have played it before, go play it again. It's great. Definitely one of the best games I've played this year. Maybe one of the best games I've played ever. I cannot wait to be able to play Bioshock 2 and subsequently Bioshock Infinite in the year to come. And if you want to join me along for the ride, consider dropping this video a like, subscribing to my channel for more content just like this, as well as Let's Plays and some other special content that shall remain undisclosed for the time being. As always, stay safe guys, and I'll be back again in the next one.